So, like I say, Champions League final, again, he was on form with that one, but there was a number of different games that made him stand out. I think that's what made him the player he was. And the clubs that he went to after, every time he was on the field, he always done something special. I remember a couple of goals. He was at Crystal Palace 2009. He was about 35 yards out. Just got the ball middle of the field, hit it. The thing was through the back of the net. You know what I mean? A couple of goals against Watford as well, and renowned for just as soon as he got the ball outside the box, he's having a go. Obviously, his distribution between all that as well. I think as his career's developed, he's played in that many different positions. His style of play has changed ever so slightly as well. The earlier parts of his career was more of a forward-going attacking player, whereas towards the back end of his career was more the distribution end of things. And I think just that alone, there was a number, you can't just define him for one moment. There was too many, I think, in those eyes. It's the same with all these players. You know, they've all got their own little things, their own little thing you remember them for. I mean, I remember Scholes as well, Gerrard, they're all notorious for hitting balls from 25, 30 yards, and you know, you'll remember them forever, you know what I mean? Same with the like free kicks. I don't know if Scholes was that great with free kicks, to be fair, but like Gerrard, Lampard as well, it's just when they get up to take it, you know you're going to get a result from it, whether it's played into the box to somebody to get on at the end of it, or they're having a go themselves. You've always got that kind of thing. One that will stand out in your mind, but
you're spot on with that. I think every time any of these players had the ball, in your head you knew something special could happen. You just knew that there's a chance something special could happen. I remember the thing that stands in my mind with Frank Lampard, there's no reason for it not to be in my mind for the other two, but it isn't in my mind for the other two, that his image is so good. Like, his whole image comes across like he's a poster boy through and through. But even on the field, like, he's got the least number of yellow cards, he's got the least number of red cards out of the other two players, but his tackling is still at 71% accuracy. So he puts in a tackle, a good accurate tackle.
He's only got 2 less yellow cards than Gerrard over his career in 100 more games.
A few less red, though. I think Gerrard does him on red cards.
Yeah. 6.
But he is clean. Like, even when he goes on talk shows, like, Gerrard sometimes comes across grumpy, Scholes doesn't want to be there, but Lampard laps it up. I just think in my head, his image, he is a proper poster boy.
Yeah. I think he's from a different walk of life. He's definitely a bit of a different walk of life as well, though. I think when you see him, I remember when I ran into him outside the Sony building one time, right, in the West End. He was just in the I just caught him, was like, fucking Frank Lampard. And just went over, and he was just like, a guy looks $1 million, like, do you know what I mean? He's like suited and booted, and it's kind of, do you know,
he came from money, though, because his dad was a footballer as well, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So he's kind of been brought up around the game.
And the Redknapp, he's related to the Redknapps as well, aren't they?
Exactly. Redknaps are cousins to them. So.
I suppose Gerrard and Scholes both came off council estates.
Yeah,
it's a bad thing. But
yeah, it's just different.
Yeah. So, Graham, I'm going to bring it to you. When for you did Steven Gerrard become that superstar? When for you were like that, like, he's the guy.
I mean, it's hard for me to say. I followed his career right through from all the youth career as well, his youth career. So I knew he was going to be a big player. With the partnership he had with Owen, the two of them were dynamite in the youth team. I knew when Owen came through, he was going to be brilliant, and I was just waiting on Gerrard coming through, to be honest. So since I first saw him, I was like, the boy's going to be brilliant. But I think what cemented him in the world game was probably 2001, where we won the UEFA Cup, the FA Cup, and the League Cup. And then since then, obviously, he won the Champions League 2005, and then there was the Gerrard final 2006 against West Ham. But I would say 2001 was where he kind of announced himself on the world stage and started winning things and doing things at the highest level, I would say.
Yeah. And when, for you, was he the guy that you were like, right, like, everything needs to be around this guy, everything needs to go through this guy? Because it must have happened in people's head before it happened in the park, or did you see it happen in the park and then think, that's the right thing to be happening?
I mean, the teams we had when he was coming through, all right, early on there was the Robbie Fowlers, the Steve McManamans, these kind of guys.
And that's who I'm kind of talking about.
Sorry?
That's what I'm kind of talking about. When did he become better or more of an impact player than those guys? Was he an impact player during those guys when they were around?
He came into the team just as they were sort of finishing up, really. So I think Robbie Fowler went away to Leeds or somewhere.
To Leeds and then Man City afterwards. I can't remember which order. It was Leeds and Man City. Or Man City.
I'm sure it was Leeds first. And McManaman obviously went away to Real Madrid. But yeah, I mean, all the sort of buzz and hype was around Michael Owen in terms of winning matches and stuff like that. And Gerrard, in reverse to Scholes, was more of a sort of combative midfielder when he first came through. And then as his career progressed, he sort of moved a little bit more forward and had more influence on games. Probably after he got the captaincy, I'd say 2003 is when he started moving a little bit more forward and sort of getting more assists, more goals, and sort of grabbing games by the scruff of the neck. And then obviously after Michael Owen left, he had to because there was nobody else to do it.
True.
So yeah, around about then, 2003, 2004. Sorry, go on.
Where do you think he was most comfortable on the park? Does stats? Sorry, where was he most comfortable in your opinion? And do stats back that up?
Where was he most comfortable or most effective?
Go both.
To be honest, he's one of those players that can play anywhere. Like, he's a natural athlete. He's 6'2". He's got an engine for days. In terms of defensive statistics, he blows both Lampard and Scholes out of the water in terms of like headed duels won, tackles.
Tackle accuracy. Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, tackle accuracy as well. Like he's the highest.
Aerial battles, clearances, everything defensive-wise, he was head and shoulders above them. But yeah, I mean, I think he could play anywhere, to be honest, on the park and do a job for you. But I think his most effective position was probably, in terms of numbers and output, probably playing behind Torres as a number 10.
I think the number 10 was where he was quite lethal, man.
Yeah, but I would say he was a better number 8. I'd say he gave more. I'd say he offered more to the team as a whole as a number 8. Whereas when we had Torres, we didn't really need him to be a number 8 because we had Xabi Alonso. And
Xabi Alonso, I've always said, was a big factor in what happened to that Liverpool team. We lost Xabi Alonso. He's a fucking superb player.
Yeah, no Steven Gerrard, but he was all right. But
advantage.
Yeah. Sorry?
I said advantage, play on.
Yeah. So yeah, I would say in terms of effectiveness, definitely as a number 10, but where I would pick him and where I would play him and where most Liverpool fans see him as a number 8 box to box, sort of grabbing games by the scruff of the neck, doing everything. Roy of the Rovers.
Okay, so I'm going to bring up something. Liverpool fans hate talking about this and I hate bringing it up. But I'm going to bring it up just because it's a platform where, were you as a fan, wait, no, not were you, how did you feel as a fan when he slipped?
Like at that exact moment?
Just even after, like, did you hate the guy? Did you still love him? Like, tell me about, because that, for me, like, anytime I speak to anybody who isn't a Liverpool fan and we get into a bit of to and fro-in, I get a gift sent to me and it just triggers me.
See, the thing is, like, all right, he slipped, great. But Demba Ba's still got to run from the halfway line and put it past Mignolet. If you look at what Mignolet does in that situation, he might as well have been a hologram with boots on. The ball was hit straight at him and it just went straight through him. So if Mignolet keeps his feet together, we're not talking about the Gerrard slip all these years ago. If we beat Crystal Palace being 3-0 up and then drawing 3-3, if that doesn't happen, we wouldn't be talking about it. But it's nice for all the fans of other teams to have something to hold over him. I'm sure he's pretty pissed off about it. Obviously, I know for a fact he's still pissed off about it. He still talks about it in every interview because it always gets brought up, and he's like, yeah, it still haunts him and what have you. But as a fan and as a fan of both Liverpool and Gerrard, it didn't really change my opinion on him.
I'm exactly the same. I don't hold that against him in any way, shape, or form. I'm not even someone who, is upset with him because,
maybe something that wasn't expected.
Can I come in on this one as well? Because I think it's mad. First of all, just ask: do people hold it against him? Liverpool fans? Do any fans hold it against him?
They do, but everybody else is like.
Never heard
See
what?
if it had been somebody nobody.
Liverpool fans hold it against Gerrard?
No, I didn't say Liverpool fans, but I meant every other fan.
Ali was asking the question, how did you feel? I've never heard a Liverpool fan have a bad word to say about him.
I don't hold it against him. Absolutely not.
But I say that could have happened to any of the three of them. But see if it had been, somebody that wasn't as high a caliber of player, it wouldn't have been remembered as highly. It would have been like a blunder, and it would have been more joked about and left it where it was. Yeah. But see, because the type of player he was, same with Lampard. When they've all had little hiccups and moments in time, it's just that really kind of took the rails off the title challenge, which they've come close again, and hopefully it's. He's finally get there, but it's one of the things he's always wanted to win that with them, and I think that's the only thing he hasn't won with Liverpool was the league. He's won pretty much everything else with them.
But that's it. I mean, were you holding it against Terry for slipping when he hit that penalty in the Champions League final, or were you just like, oh, what happens? Come on, I mean,
it gets brought up. It's one of those things that can happen to anyone. It's a defining moment. It can change anything, but again, it's still quite bitter when that comes up. It's like, look at that.
I mean, it's quite bad that Cristiano Ronaldo had the season of his life, but he's so lucky because in that same penalty shootout, if Terry's goes in, it's Ronaldo that missed United's penalty. That one that Terry slipped, if that goes in, the only penalty he missed is Ronaldo's, who'd had the season of his life. Do you know what I mean? So it can happen quite crazy with that. But for me, again, like see what's mad with Gerrard though is this is my I do think that you go into these players, they always will have a certain thing that they go, that might be like an Achilles heel. For Scholes, I've always said it's the tackling because 5'6", severe asthma, might be going blind, couldn't tackle for shit. Do you know what I mean? But Gerrard did have a bit of a ricket in him, bro. I mean, he had 3 against Chelsea. There was the Didier Drogba back pass. Do you remember that one, Dev? You must remember that one.
Yeah.
And there was also one in it was the League Cup game, I think 2005, maybe 2004, 2005, where I think Gerrard's about to score to make it 2-0 to Liverpool, misses, runs down the other end and puts it in his own goal. And for me, I always remember with Gerrard, one thing, I remember Rafa Benitez hauled him off at Goodison one year and accusing him of not using his brain. Do you remember that? He said that his actual quote was, they're asking, why did you take Gerrard off 2-1 down at Goodison? And he turned around and said, well, sometimes you need to play with your brain. And we needed to pass the ball and keep the ball. And for me, that's always a thing of going. And again, this is not just an attack on Gerrard. It's just something that I feel like that might have been a slight hole because he also set up Thierry Henry and Luis Suarez for England as well. Twice he gave them goals as well. So Gerrard did do this a couple of times. And I think that's the one thing that's fired at him because...
Is that because he's the most involved player in the game, though?
It could be that he's trying to carry the team. That's the thing, because obviously it's hard to say with England, but then England should have been better than England was and never was. So that's a different thing. But with Liverpool, the teams that Gerrard were in really did sort of rely on him. I mean, that's the difference when you talk about, for example. You never asked me the question, when I'm guessing at some point it was coming, Ali. When did you know Scholes was the man at Man United? The difference was he came through as this unique group. So it was hard to be the man in that group because you came through with Beckham, Keane. No, Keane was already there, but you came through with Beckham, Giggs. There were so many that they almost were this unison. But that. The thing is, for me, you still had to go and convert that into a winning team. I mean, you brought up the other week, Ali, you were talking about the Michael Jordan documentary, which I finally started watching now. It's everyone's The Last Dance, by the way.
Yeah, I've watched it all.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through it, but it's fucking superb. It's so good. But
I've heard it's good. I'll need to watch it.
good as Michael Jordan was, what was the opinion of Michael Jordan in the 80s to Michael Jordan in the 90s?
Oh, you've gone quiet.
You've gone. Go back.
Say that again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can now, you.
Okay, I thought. Okay, you got me.
It just goes very faint, so we can still hear you, but it just goes very faint.
I'm on full volume, guys. I apologise. You got me now?
Yeah, it's all good.
I think it's just when you lean back.
Oh, okay. I'll just I'll part myself
Lean
in.
forward a bit more.
So when you look at the way that Michael Jordan was rated, say even before 91, to say Jordan they'd won a couple of NBA titles. Ali, what were they saying about him in compared to guys like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, compared to once they'd won a couple of, not even they won the 6, but when they won a couple back to back, what was the difference of the opinion in Michael Jordan?
Yeah, it was huge. It was worlds apart. And
you can't get away from the point that these players played in team sports, and teams win trophies. And the fact is, Paul Scholes is sat there with 25 major trophies, including 11 league titles. And you can't take that away from him. And you can't say that that's because, but that's a team reward and it's an individual. You're like, but it's a team sport. You know what I mean? And Jordan was the most talented player, but he needed that confirmation.
Scotty and Rodman, yeah, I hear what you're saying. But would Scholes have adopted the superstar if he was? Would he have adopted that superstar lifestyle? I don't think Scholes is about that.
I generally feel I think this is more, I hate to say they're making it Scholes and Gerrard, because obviously Lampard's part of this conversation, but when you do look at those two, I feel like they were both perfect at what they were. Right? I don't know if Gerrard improves United the way Scholes did. I don't know if Scholes could do what Gerrard did for Liverpool. Not even for a heartbeat, bro. Honestly, it's not even a question for me. We had Beckham, we had Keane, we had leaders and incredible players. We had a galaxy of top players. But for me, as I've said before at the start, if you were to line all them up, I'm still picking Scholes. Because for me...
Okay, so here's one of the things, and I want Dev to jump in on this as well.
Yep.
If you look at Chelsea and Frank Lampard starts, and when they're running through the team, the commentators are talking about Frank Lampard, talking about Steven Gerrard. The commentators aren't really putting that pressure on Scholes. Scholes almost got through his career. Without that pressure, the pressure was on whoever else. Whereas in Liverpool teams and in Chelsea teams, the eyes are on Frank and Steven. So
I'd say more Steven than Frank, though, to be fair, because Frank had Drogba. He had a lot of good players in that Chelsea team, mate. Drogba was the man, like.
Go for it, Deb.
I think they all worked off each other in that kind of way. I mean, he was the heartbeat of the team. I actually think if Scholes didn't live in the shadow as much, you were saying this about image, if he didn't live in the shadows as much, he could have been just as famous or probably more. He might have had the interest to go elsewhere. You know what I mean? There might have been other teams that came in for him. There wasn't really that interest for somebody to go in to buy Paul Scholes. He was even though he was a good player in his own right, he had the interest for Lampard, Gerrard. They had the interest from many other teams, and they refused to go. Whereas I don't think Scholes really had that interest, and he kind of, I'm doing well here. I'm quite happy. He never really wanted to further what he was doing or take that next step. You know what I mean? He came through the class. I think he was not the worst out of that bunch. You know what I mean? But I certainly don't think he would be the best player out of all of them that came through that kind of youth system, for sure. But they're all different, a different style of play and everything like that at the end of the day. So,
do you think Scholes would have handled the pressure as well as Frank or Steven did?
I don't think so. I think, again, it was just the eyes are on them all the time. It's the image, again, portraying that. But he was always there. You know what I mean? Always in the back of the mic. He was like a silent assassin sort of thing. I would put Scholes down as. You wouldn't really... He would do something, but it would be kind of a bit of a shock, but you'd be expecting it at the same time. He'd just pull something out of nowhere. And I think that's where he was a little bit different than Lampard and Gerrard. He would pick a pass, they're all good, but Scholes would just hit it and you'd be like, you wouldn't see that coming. But again, it's his stature as well. He's a tiny guy. which probably worked in his favour for some aspects, because if he's been the same sort of height and build as Gerrard and Lampard, I don't think he might have been as good a player. You know, he might have faded away, but again, that was him. That's his style. That's how unique he was. But I don't think he could have fitted into the Chelsea team. I don't think he probably could have fitted into the Man U team. I think Lampard and Gerrard probably could have got in the Man U team, and I'm not saying that to be biased. I genuinely don't think Scholes could have got into any of the teams at any point during the seasons with the players that they've had. So
I would say Scholes is most likely to get into the Barcelona team.
Wait, before can I add to that?
Can I ask, ahead of who?
What, in the Barcelona team?
Aye.
Didn't Xavi say that Scholes is his role model? And Pep says
Zidane did say that
he
was one of the toughest players he's played against. But
this is the thing. I think Scholes is higher rated than
Michael, I'll give you the defence of Scholes in a second. But G, do you want to add to that in terms of the pressure that Steven Gerrard had? Frank Lampard maybe didn't have that much, but he had pressure. Scholes didn't have that pressure. Was Scholes even ever a captain? Was he ever a captain of the team?
No,
maybe not that type.
Maybe like once or twice, but.
So, and then we've all been in situations where our performances are looked at. We've all been in professions or whatever where it's performance related, and the way you act and perform with pressure and without pressure is very different. It's very, very different. So, how would you rate Scholes' performance with regards to pressure, no pressure? Could he have done it if he had the pressure? Where are we at with that?
All right, well, let's just look at the cup final records, all three of them. And we'll go with goal contributions per game for each cup final that they played in. Sure. Steven Gerrard, 0.55 goal contributions, so a goal or assist every just less than 2 cup finals he plays in. Frank Lampard, 0.38, so just more than 1 in every 3. Paul Scholes, 0.14, so 1 in 8, 7.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? On top of that, like I say, he was dropped for a Champions League final, at least one Champions League final. Was Gerrard or Lampard ever dropped for a Champions League final?
I think how good were the 2 squads, guys? How good was the Liverpool squad compared to the United squad?
It was in the Champions League final.
Probably because of Gerrard. How many trophies has Gerrard won? I'm sorry, we're just going to get into. You can make the stats spin over.
No. Let have it, please. You'll get your defence, Mike. You will get your defence. You will get your defence. I promise you.
He was in a top team. He was in a top team. It had a huge squad of great players.
I agree, right. But we'll give you that defence in a second.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
He did ask me the question, to be fair. So do you know what I mean? But maybe just answer the question. Yeah.
Carry on.
You said how many? You asked me a question, Jim.
No.
Oh, cool. But you asked a question. I answered it.
When did I ask a question?
Graham, carry on with your analysis here.
Okay, so yeah, Paul Scholes has been dropped in a Champions League final. Neither Gerrard or Lampard has. Okay, you can argue that Liverpool's team perhaps wasn't as strong as Man United's team.
Perhaps.
But every game that Gerrard has played in a final, he's had an effect on that final. Do you know what I mean? That's performing at the highest level under pressure. Both Gerrard and Lampard were picked for England regularly. Paul Scholes was shifted out to the left wing because he wasn't good enough to get in the midfield. I would argue that perhaps that was down to the coaching, and if you'd played Steven Gerrard out on the left, we might have done better, but Steven Gerrard can play more than one position quite well. Whereas I think Paul Scholes is kind of limited. He's a good midfielder, but if you put him wide, he struggles because he hasn't got the engine. I would say Lampard, probably to the same extent, probably isn't as effective wide, although can deliver a cross, so could probably play a Beckham-type role. But regardless, under pressure, I would say Steven Gerrard is probably one of the best players I have ever seen play the game in England. Like, time and time again, he delivers when he needs to deliver. Scored against Olympiacos to get us through the groups in the Champions League. Scored in the final to get the comeback on the go. He's got an FA Cup final named after him. Like, do you know what I mean? There's so many examples of Liverpool being in the shit and Steven Gerrard pulling us through. Lampard probably has scored lots of important goals for Chelsea as well. I would say that him, and then probably Drogba and those sort of players that they had more options to turn to. Yeah. Paul Scholes isn't really that kind of player though. Like, doesn't really grab a game by the scruff of the neck. Never really has been known for that, to be honest. And I think
what I'm asking is that if he was team captain, pressure's on him, all eyes are on him, do you think he would have still had that? Do you think he would have been able to have more of an impact on the game if he was relied to have an impact? Like, Liverpool relied on Gerrard at times. They were when you're in the shit, they were like, right, okay, we're looking at Steven Gerrard here. We're looking at him to do something. Chelsea, again, if something was in the shit, they would look at certain key players. Lampard was one of those.
Yeah.
Did Man U ever feel like that about Scholes? Was he ever in a situation where either he was a key player, he was someone that had the pressure on him, or was he just the guy that was happy to play in the background and just let everybody else deal with everything that they had to deal with and just be part of something better and part of something good? Mikey?
Yeah, me. Well, okay, so first of all, the pressure, and United relied on him. I think that a key moment for that was when United had started to tail off, because obviously Scholes' career coincides with United's pure dominance of the league for all that time. So, however, Scholes was asked to come out of retirement to save a United team that had an injury crisis, and he left with one more league title, which I think is pretty fucking gangster. You know, that's pretty dope, because that was a United team that was on the wane, coinciding with the rise of Manchester City, unfortunately. But that's what was happening at that time. If you're asking about how would he have coped in a team that absolutely needed him, it's hard to say, because he was in the great United team managed by the great Sir Alex Ferguson. And I've never seen a player play for Manchester United to say, yeah, we didn't have pressure on us from Alex Ferguson. He was quite easygoing like that. I've never heard that. Alex Ferguson ever. Every single player to be part of that manager's group of players for that amount of time, well, we saw how many didn't manage to do that. We can go through the list. The top players, they didn't last with Ferguson. Why did that happen? Like you said last time, Ali, did these players want to leave?
Is that because they had an opinion that was different to Alex Ferguson, though? Is that because they had...
I don't know if Alex Ferguson was that person I don't know if Alex Ferguson was that person who wouldn't listen to his players. I think it's the way you go about doing it. So if you're seeing a different opinion's one thing. But I think if, for example, you had value to add, I don't know if Alex Ferguson was led by focus and control. We know that. That was his management style. But he also was well known that there was a persona of Ferguson that actually, when you look behind the scenes, you know, he would have team mornings with his players. He was kind of old school, but he'd have meetings with his senior players, and he did involve them. He just never gave away the control. He was very old school. He's from fucking Glasgow. He's from a certain part of Glasgow. They do things in a certain way. But Ferguson, players clashed with Ferguson, but also he was ruthless. Like, he was going to sell Wayne Rooney 2 years or 3 years before Rooney went. It's just that Ferguson went instead. Like, if players was no longer able to deliver at the highest level, they went. He didn't keep players around that weren't up for it anymore. That was Ferguson's way. Scholes was never under consideration for leaving like that, because he was like, Scholes is the Rolls Royce of the midfield. He's the player I can rely on. And he might not.
I think he was just scared of Fergie, mate.
It wasn't Scholes. He wasn't that personality. He fucking hated doing interviews. He despised it famously. I couldn't believe when he became a pundit. That was wild to me. And he's actually really funny as well. But
I think he's quite good as a pundit. He's quite dry.
He's not that sort of person. Like, Scholes used to be seen. I remember my granddad told me he bumped into him in Saddleworth one time, scoring in the chippy. He just turned around. He went, "I don't think you're meant to be
You
eating
got
that."
to name drop anybody else whilst we're here.
But he did. He just said,
To be honest with you, Mikey, was I on a night out with you and we went wherever we went? Dwight was just
sat outside the girls' toilets when he pulled his chair. We should be saying this on here, but sat up. You were like, he's actually sat there because the girls have to walk past him. That's what's going on.
And then today he was on Talk Sports saying, "I don't know why I have a Playboy image."
But yeah, I remember just saying, he was like, "Are you meant to be eating that?" And he was just laughing. But Scholes just didn't want anything to do with it, man. He lived out in the sticks. He just wanted to do his thing. And when he came onto the football field, he had like this brain to run the game. But the rest of it, he just wasn't interested, man. He didn't like interviews. He didn't want the fuss. He just wanted to go out and play football. And he wanted to be part of that group of players that they come through. Does that mean he was a less of a player because he didn't want the limelight? I don't know. Like, it was hard to separate that group was such a group. It's very unique for a set of players to come right the way through like that and have the level of success that they had. It was a very, very special group of players. I don't know if it ever will happen again like that. We have some great groups of players coming through in our youth teams right now, but will you ever get a team like the class of 92 or 92, 93?
I don't think so, no.
I think
the way youth teams work nowadays, they're chopped up. They're in a youth team for 2 or 3 years and they're distributed. They don't get a chance to do what these guys do.
You play under Ferguson for that amount of time. You play in you win that amount of trophies. It just doesn't happen. But no pressure. I don't buy into saying that Scholes wasn't under pressure. I just think it was a different sort of pressure because he didn't have to shoulder it on his own as much. We had a team that had Ryan Giggs. He had Ryan Giggs as being like his captain right the way through. He'd watch Giggs kind of a year or two ahead. And you just must have been, imagine watching a young Ryan Giggs, what Giggs was like. I mean, Giggs was a great player. But then first few years of Ryan Giggs, you were like, this is George Best Mark II. Like, it was something else. So you'd had this group around you that you never really felt like you were there alone. You had to shoulder it on your own. So I think it's a different sort of pressure. But then to say that, well, then Scholes doesn't quite hit the same mark. What would Scholes been like at a Chelsea or a Liverpool? I don't know. I never saw it. I saw him at Man United for his whole career, and he was my favourite player. Because when I used to sit up in the North Stand. I don't know if anyone, well, probably not been there because you don't get away fans in there, but you used to kind of this view right over the pitch. So you used to be so high up. So you used to be watching the players. But I remember the first time I got tucked up there to watch it, and I turned around to my uncle and said, "Scholes is the best player," and he just nodded. And I hadn't seen it until I watched it from above. And then watching the way this works, I'm like, yo, Scholes is actually so important. But was Scholes going to be... He played in a team with David Beckham, though. Beckham was the ultimate superstar of his time. Off the field, a very good player on the field as well. Maybe underrated of his celebrity off the field, but...
He actually changed the game. Beckham changed the game in terms of a footballer being a proper endorsement candidate.
The way we talk about your Pogbas or your Raheem Sterling's, whatever you want to talk about, who are the way they are off the field now. I mean, David Beckham is a big milestone in that journey to the celebrity kind of footballer, isn't he? And still doing, look what he's doing in America with what he's building over there with the franchise and stuff. Like, he's a different animal. But Scholes didn't need to be that guy, and Scholes did the job that the team needed. Does that mean, what would Scholes be if suddenly all those players had left? Do you remember when Hughes, Kanchelskis and Ensol went in one goal? If Scholes had been the only one who came through at that point, because that's when they all came through together, if Scholes had been the only one who come through, how would his career have shaped? It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I think would Scholes have gone deeper as early as he did if Roy Keane hadn't left? It's hard to say. Scholes changed his game to the way the team needed him to, because Roy Keane was so important to that team as a leader. So Scholes always gave the team what it needed. Does that mean as individually then that makes him less of a player? I think his trophy cabinet says different, but that's an opinion. Do you know what I mean? And again,
you keep bringing up team trophies to justify Paul Scholes, though. But every single one of them has won pretty much every trophy you can win. All three players.
Yeah, but Scholes has won more than the other two put together. Just to be clear.
So. But how many UEFA Team of the Years was he in? None.
All right.
How many?
How many of them made the Premier League 20 years team? There was a panel team and a public team. Scholes made both. Gerrard made only the public. Lampard made none. Scholes was the only player rated in the.
Lampard was an MLS All-Star. I'll have you know, mate. I don't see any of the two of them doing that.
But one thing I will say on this, right? I think it's really, really important, just for anyone who's watching it as well. Right?
By the way, before you say that,
I think, like, okay. But
what he's trying to do is distract from the fact that Steven Gerrard has won.
No, you're going to jump in. I'm going to finish my point. So I'm going to finish my point. So I was mid-sentence.
Before you finish your point,
because before you finish my point, and then I got interrupted. So there's
just
one
before you finish your point.
Quite universal here to these three.
Just before you finish your point, we've got 2 minutes remaining. Do you want to send another link?
Yes.
I can say it in that time, then send another link. It's a really simple thing. All three players were greats, straight up. And if anybody says that one of these three wasn't great, I feel like they're saying it with a club hat on, because all three of them were great.
I fully agree with that. I fully agree with that. And to be honest with you, like, you could have this argument for 20 years, and I don't think there'd ever be a clear argument.
Many have, many will, many will continue. They were icons. They were different. Like there's similarities, and then there were striking differences. Of course, they're all individuals, and they're going to get that. But I think they were all such a part of their club's histories. And maybe when we look back at them now, they've all retired. You really do realise what it is they gave to their teams.